Welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to viewers in North America and around the globe. I'm Duncan Golostani. Our top stories. Separatist clashes flare up in Yemen, raising concerns that the country's fragile humanitarian situation will become worse. A day of mourning in Kabul. More than 100 people are now known to have died in Saturday's suicide bombing. Russia's opposition leader Alexei Navalny is released after he and dozens more are arrested at a protest rally in Moscow. And the Grammys are underway in New York, attendees wearing white roses in solidarity with victims of sexual harassment. Hello, welcome to the programme. Aid groups say new fighting in southern Yemen has made an already bad humanitarian situation worse. At least 10 people were killed and dozens of others injured in the port city of Aden on Sunday during fighting between former allies in the civil war. The Yemen president, Abed Rabbu Mansour Hadi, who's based in Saudi Arabia, has ordered an immediate ceasefire. Bill Hayton reports.
This is a war within a war. The southern city of Aden, a battlefield between factions who once fought together against the Houthi rebel movement. Former allies are now divided over the future of the country. These men are waving the flag of the former South Yemen, a country that ceased to exist nearly 30 years ago when it merged with North Yemen. Now, some want it to split again.
We want a civilian government, a government of law, a government made according to the principles of the Southern Transition Council.
These southern separatists are a faction backed by the United Arab Emirates. They want the government to resign. The internationally recognized government is backed by Saudi Arabia and refuses to go. The two have now managed to agree a truce.
We're asking all fighters to come back to improve our defence and provide a real administration that assures everybody justice and equality.
Yemen is already divided between government and rebels. The secessionists want another division back to the old north-south border. It's not clear how much support they have. In Aden, the fighting seems to have subsided, but the tensions remain and the peace may not last long. Bill Hayton, BBC News.
We have some breaking news now, and suspected militants have launched an attack on a military training academy in the Afghan capital, Kabul. An eyewitness said explosions hit an area near the Marshal Fahim National Defence University, that's west of Kabul city centre. The explosions began at around 5 o'clock local time and lasted for at least an hour. Small arms fire was also heard. Fighting between attackers and security forces at the site is said to be continuing. The complex has been targeted before. 15 cadets were killed in a suicide bombing last October. We're keeping across that story and we will bring you any developments as we have them. Well, staying in Afghanistan, because more than 100 people are now confirmed to have been killed and 230 injured in Saturday's suicide bombing in Kabul. The country has been observing a day of national mourning after one of the worst attacks in years. From Kabul, Sukunda Kamani sent this report.
Hospitals across Kabul have been at full stretch, trying to treat the huge number of wounded. This taxi driver was just meters away from the explosion.
There was smoke, shrapnel and burning smell everywhere. Everyone looked terrified. There were dead bodies and injured people covering the street.
The Taliban packed this ambulance with explosives. The attacker detonated them close to a police compound on a busy street. Over the last year, Kabul has been repeatedly attacked. It used to be one of the safest places in the country. Now it feels like one of the most dangerous. The Taliban and the Islamic State group both at the moment seem to be focusing their efforts on targeting the capital, Kabul, rather than trying to capture rural territory from the security forces. They know that attacks here will spread fear, will generate headlines, and will undermine the government. I asked the head of the Afghan intelligence service about rising public anger with his force's failure to prevent so many attacks.
We are using all our assets, all our whatever possibility and resources in our hand to prevent it. But you cannot prevent 100% all the attacks.
Meanwhile, the families of victims line up outside hospitals, desperate for news. This man has been going from morgue to morgue, trying to identify his cousin's corpse.
I've seen so many dead bodies. All the morgues are full of them. They are all burnt so badly, you can't even recognize them.
Last year, more than 2,000 civilians were killed in just 9 months across Afghanistan. This year looks set to be just as deadly. Sikandar Kamani, BBC News, Kabul.
Thousands of people have demonstrated in cities across Russia in support of calls by the opposition leader Alexei Navalny for a boycott of the presidential election in March. Police in Moscow detained Mr. Navalny as he took part in a rally in the city centre. He's now been released without charges. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg was at the protests and witnessed Mr. Navalny's arrest.
It isn't easy taking on the Kremlin. Alexei Navalny has been jailed 3 times in the last year. He's been barred from the upcoming presidential election. So today, Mr. Navalny called his supporters onto the streets.
Alexei Navalny is Russia's most prominent opposition figure and President Putin's most vocal critic. He's been barred from running in the presidential election. He's now being arrested by police.
This was no softly. We saw Mr. Navalny surrounded by police. Seconds later, he was thrown onto the ground. Then, the politician Vladimir Putin cannot bring himself to mention by name, was dragged into the police bus. His supporters called on voters to boycott the election. All the candidates, they believe, are hand-picked by the Kremlin.
They are candidates that Putin approved, and we do not have candidates that we want to have.
There's little doubt that Vladimir Putin will walk this election, with the help of Russian TV, which maintains his macho image, portraying him as a cross between action man and father of the nation. And Mr. Putin enjoys far more airtime than any of the other candidates. But the Kremlin still needs people to come out and vote for Vladimir Putin. That's why calls to boycott the elections are making the Russian authorities nervous. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
It was very much Bruno Mars's night at the 60th Annual Grammy Awards. He was the biggest winner with 6 awards, including the most prestigious category, Album of the Year. He also got honoured for Song of the Year and Record of the Year. Kendrick Lamar won 4 Grammys, among them Best Rap Album. And Ed Sheeran has won 2 Grammys, including Best Pop Vocal. Well, let's go to New York, where we can speak to the BBC's Neda Tawfik. So, Neda, first of all, quite a few political moments up on stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in music, a lot of the artists discuss these social issues through their songs, but today at the Grammys, we saw it in both performance and on the red carpet. So the Me Too movement, very much a part of the conversation on the red carpet. Women and men wore white roses as a sign of standing in solidarity with victims of abuse. And during the live performances, Kesha gave a very, very powerful performance. I think one that will be talked about for a long time in kind of key Grammy moments. She was joined by Cyndi Lauper, Bebe Rexha, Julia Michaels, Andra Day, some other female artists who stood with her and sang in the chorus as she sang her song praying. We also had, you know, a diverse group of artists, such as Kendrick Lamar. He opened up the Grammys singing an array of his tracks from his album Damn, and that was a very kind of racial, an album that spoke about racial issues in this country, political issues in this country, and so he had kind of performances by U2 and Dave Chappelle in there as well that spoke about those themes. And then we also had a little comedy sketch where several of the performers read excerpts of the book Fire and Fury, and Hillary Clinton actually made a cameo reading a portion of that book, which has angered President Trump. President Trump has slammed that book, which tries to kind of cast an eye on the inside workings of his White House, and so there was a bit of a jab at the President of the United States at the Grammys tonight as well for that.
Yes, Hillary Clinton appearing was one of those moments, wasn't it, Neda? In terms of the winners, did it go as predicted?
Well, you know, I think a lot of people expected either Jay-Z or Kendrick Lamar to win for Album of the Year, but Bruno Mars beat them out for the top prize. Jay-Z led the nominations with 8 going into today's Grammys, but he didn't take those prizes, so I think that was a bit interesting. But Kendrick Lamar did do quite well with 5 Grammys, including for Best Rap Performance, Best Rap Album, so that will certainly kind of, I think, quell a little bit of the criticism that the Grammys has received in recent years, that they haven't really given enough credit to the role that rap and hip-hop has played in the industry and on pop culture. I think going into this, a lot of people anticipated that Alessia Cara would get Best New Artist, that Ed Sheeran would get Best Pop Solo Performance, just because he was shut out of some of those other top categories of the night. So a little bit of an expected divide of wins, but again, some surprises in there.
Okay, Neda, thanks very much. Neda Tawfik in New York for us. Let's take a look at some more stories making the news now. And prosecutors in Cambodia have charged 10 foreigners with producing pornographic images after raiding a villa in the northwestern town of Siem Reap. They were arrested on Thursday after images emerged of people apparently imitating sexual positions at a party. But some reports say several people in the pictures from the party do not appear among those held. The Polish President Andrzej Duda says he will review a draft bill which would make it illegal to refer to Nazi death camps as Polish. Israel has fiercely objected to the proposed legislation, saying it would prevent the truth being spoken about the Holocaust. Poland argues that the Second World War death camps were operated entirely by occupying German forces. Greek Cypriots will need to vote again after an inconclusive result in the first round of their presidential election. With all votes counted, the current Conservative president, Nikos Anastasiadis, garnered the most votes, but not enough to avoid a runoff in a week's time. He will face the leftist candidate Stavros Mala. There's been an outcry in Mexico City over the disappearance of a teenage student who was arrested by police on Tuesday. Hundreds of people carrying placards called for the return of 17-year-old Marco Antonio Sanchez. He had been out taking photographs but was arrested and accused of stealing the camera. The BBC's Tim Allman reports.
Where is Marco? The question being asked by his family and friends. A teenager described as playful, a joker, very good-natured, who's been missing for a week now. He was last seen being bundled into a police van after being accused of stealing a camera. His family are desperate for answers.
The way my nephew was arrested, in the brutal way he was beaten, that he did not arrive where he was going to, blame him for that or accuse him of something that he wasn't doing.
This isn't the first time a young person has mysteriously disappeared, nor is it the first time the police are being blamed. Officers in several Mexican states have been accused of abuse, torture and extorting money from students and their families. Is Marco Sanchez the latest victim of deadly police corruption?
¿Dónde está? La gente no desaparece. Eso es una mentira. Where is he? People do not just disappear, that's a lie. They took him. The immense pain that this means for families, for all of us, for those of us who have children in this city, who are growing up here. Who has the ultimate responsibility? Who allows this exercise of corruption, impunity, violence?
2 officers involved in Marco's arrest have been detained, but the fate of Marco Antonio Sanchez remains a mystery. Tim Allman, BBC News.
Do stay with us here on BBC News. Still to come, tributes to the father of flat pack furniture and founder of IKEA, who's died at the age of 91. Welcome back. You're watching BBC News. Our top story this hour. Aid groups in Yemen say new fighting in the port city of Aden has made an already bad humanitarian situation worse. At least 10 people died in fighting on Sunday. There's new doubt surrounding the security of so-called cryptocurrency exchanges which handle digital cash systems like Bitcoin. One of Japan's biggest exchanges, Coincheck, has offered to refund $500 million in currency stolen by hackers on Friday. This report by Rodri Davis contains flash photography.
As many as 10,000 businesses in Japan are said to accept cryptocurrencies. This virtual heist is bound to increase concerns about their security. At the center of this, Tokyo-based Coincheck, one of the largest digital currency exchanges in Japan. It said on Friday it had been hacked, resulting in the loss of $500 million, the biggest ever.
There are some troubles in one of our systems. I am sorry for causing much trouble to clients and relevant parties.
Cryptocurrencies don't have a centralized register. Their strength, in theory, comes from having a connected, distributed register called a blockchain. A transaction is ordered by putting the currency into groups called blocks, which link to and verify the previous block. The stolen Coincheck assets were said to be kept in a hot wallet, which is part of the exchange connected to the internet, as opposed to a cold wallet, where funds are stored securely offline. Coincheck said it will issue full refunds to all of the 250,000 of its users who have become victims of the hack. But will that be enough?
My total losses are about 1 million yen. I was shocked. I'm finding it difficult to trust virtual currencies anymore. Others probably will no longer invest in them.
Money cannot be kept in insecure places. I won't consider investing unless there's a reliable platform providing such services.
World leaders meeting in Davos last week issued fresh warnings about the dangers of cryptocurrencies, suggesting they risked being used for illicit activity. Will the Coincheck theft now prompt regulators to act? Rodri Davis, BBC News.
A French climber stranded on one of Pakistan's highest peaks has been flown to hospital after a rescue operation. But the search for her Polish climbing partner has been abandoned. Tim Patterson reports.
A dramatic rescue operation on one of the world's highest and most deadly mountains. An elite climbing team was rushed to the rescue after 2 climbers became stranded. As part of this daring high-altitude mission, the team was dropped more than 1,000 meters below the lost climber's last known position. They scaled the mountain overnight, eventually finding the French climber Elisabeth Revel alive. A friend and fellow mountaineer described the rescue attempt.
They started their very heroic and extraordinarily fast 7-hour climb towards her. She was able to start moving, and that's what perhaps saved her, because had she stayed where she was, it's uncertain at all whether they would have been able to reach her in time.
Elisabeth Revel has now arrived in the capital Islamabad and is being treated for frostbite, but the whereabouts of her climbing partner remain unknown. Tomek Maskiewicz had become separated. He was reportedly suffering from frostbite and snow blindness. Now the search has been called off due to bad weather and treacherous conditions. Tim Patterson, BBC News.
For more than 5 decades, people from the Zimbabwean Shona community have been living in Kenya. Their forefathers arrived as evangelists, but they have never been recognised by the Kenyan government. Now they're not recognised in Zimbabwe either, making them stateless. The BBC's Mercy Juma reports.
88-year-old Moffat Ngwabi lives in Kinoo, outside Nairobi. He is one of the few Shona people still alive who arrived in Kenya in the 1960s.
Jomo Kenyatta told our leaders that they could go anywhere in Kenya and preach, even to the Maasais. We cannot do any business to feed ourselves. It's very difficult. When we construct something to sell and the authorities find out, you get arrested.
Despite that meeting and the blessing of the president to establish a church, the Shona could not be registered because under the first post-independence constitution, there was no provision for non-Kenyans to be registered as citizens. It has left them stateless today without Kenyan or Zimbabwean citizenship, a huge problem for Moffat's growing family, which now numbers 7 children, 9 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren who were all born in Kenya. The Kenyan government was not available for comment. Shona men specialize in carpentry and construction work and other laboring jobs that do not require identification. Only those who have married a Kenyan have obtained one. The women do basketry. The Shona are known for religious piety. The first generation came to Kenya to help spread the Christian message, and their faith remains central to them. The Shona people have lived in Kenya for the past 6 decades, and this church is the only property they own as a community. Every day they hold prayers here 3 times, hoping that their plea for an identity will be heard. The United Nations Refugee Agency says it wants to end statelessness, affecting an estimated 10 million people worldwide by 2024.
We're trying to raise the profile vis-à-vis the Kenyan authorities, write their story, explain who they are, how many they are, under which circumstances they came, and why today they're here, how they're struggling for their lives, for the lives of their children, and trying to devise with the Kenyan government a way out.
Going back to Zimbabwe is not an option for them. They say a few of them attempted the journey but were turned back by the Zimbabwean government. Mercy Juma, BC News, Nairobi.
The man who founded IKEA and revolutionised the furniture industry, Ingvar Kamprad, has died at the age of 91 at his home in southern Sweden. Joe Lynham reports.
Ingvar Kamprad can safely be described as a retailing genius. Born in 1926 in southern Sweden, he started selling matches aged 5, then seeds, and then pencils. At 17, he formed IKEA, named after his own initials and the area where he was born. Now it's probably the best-known furniture store in the world, with more than 400 giant shops and annual sales of £30 billion. Kamprad was inspired to create the idea of flat-packed furniture when watching someone remove the legs off a table to fit into a customer's car. He disowned his previous support for far-right parties in Sweden during the war and lived a modest lifestyle. His house and possessions did not reflect his wealth.
I don't think I'm wearing anything that I haven't bought at a flea market. That's because I want to give a good example. If we're going to be conscious about our economy, one can't just talk about it, one has to show that.
The genius of Ingvar Kamprad was to persuade millions of people to come to his giant superstores, pick out products that they may like but not necessarily need, and then collect it in person from the warehouse. And crucially, assemble the whole thing at home. We're used to it now, but at the time it was laughed at. And today, one famous designer tipped his hat at what Ingvar Kamprad had achieved.
He actually tapped into the taste that every ordinary person wanted, so they could get this new wave of modernity that was coming about in the 1950s, and he managed to actually trap it and make it available to everybody.
IKEA said that Ingvar Kamprad, who was involved with the business right up until recently, would be much missed by his his family and warmly remembered by the company's employees worldwide.
And that's the way it's looking this hour. You're watching BBC News. Do stay with us.